Hello, George. It's great to see you again. We have a phenomenal guest today on the podcast.
Yes, today we have Alicia Peterson, MD, and the title that we're going to talk about today is Pediatric Anesthesia and Pain in Children.
Dr. Peterson and I met in Miami at the Nicholas Children's annual postgraduate course. She was formerly the director of the pain clinic at Children's National in DC. She's a keynote speaker and entrepreneur. She has been at St. Louis, Harvard, GW, and for those of you that know, I spent 2 years in Chicago at Rush. So welcome to the podcast, Dr. Peterson. It's a joy to see you again.
Yes, it's so good seeing you. And that was a fantastic conference. I'm so glad that out of that, we've been able to reconnect for your podcast.
What a journey from Chicago to DC, Rush Medical School to Harvard, pediatric intern to entrepreneur. Tell us more about your journey.
Yes. So I will say that this has been truly a journey of like self actualization, honestly, because I didn't have anyone in my family that were doctors. And my exposure to medicine was through the Cosby Show on TV. The fact that he was able to operate a clinic out of his house and spend time with his family and still be involved with events at home and really run his own show. That was what I thought medicine would be like. I was like, I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to be my own boss. And then I saw that was not the case at all. I always had it in my heart that I wanted to run my own show. And I had it in my heart that I wanted to serve patients to the highest capacity. And I found that just working within academic medicine, it doesn't provide that level of freedom that I had envisioned and being able to serve patients where they really need. I did my residency in St. Louis. Following that, I did two fellowships, one in peds anesthesia and one in pain. I want to take care of patients when they're the most vulnerable and wanted to get a pain fellowship because I wanted to serve patients outside of the operating room within their lives. And as I did that within academic medicine, I did find that there were quite a few hurdles that did not allow for me to fully engage in practice in that capacity.
Yeah, but you know what? Being your own boss is great. If you're an independent practice, I'm an independent practice. Patient care is still the most important thing. Somebody had an emergency today. We tried to get other people, but everybody else was away from the weekend. But there was nobody left. So the buck stops with me. I had to reorganize my life and come to the office to take care of those patients because you can't just cancel patients.
Right.
So I had to do
So,
what it needed to be done.
Alicia, tell me more about what the operating room looks like at Rush now. Because when I was there in 91 and 92, it was a full floor and it had windows on the periphery and like a hallway with windows all around. And the huge OR was there. And I can't remember, but if I say they had 50 anesthesiologists already at the time, I'm probably saying too few. It was a humongous department. They had cardiovascular anesthesia. They would be doing a case of open heart, and then the neurosurgeon would be opening the skull, and he had a little paper clip. He stuck in there to stop the seizures on an intractable seizure patient while she's awake. A neonatologist I would hang out with was doing a Pete's case, like maybe tubes or an inguinal hernia. Is it as huge today?
So I will say that when I was at Rush, I was a medical student. And so I rotated through anesthesia. I did quite a few anesthesia rotation. And at the time I was there, they were in the process of building. So a lot of what you remember, I shared the same memory because it was incredibly busy. But I did not get a chance to take advantage of working within the operating rooms of their huge new orthopedic hospital.
Oh,
So, where I have done anesthesia, as I mentioned, well, I was at WashU St. Louis for anesthesiology residency, and then went to St. Louis Children's for peds anesthesia fellowship. Following that, I've spent some time at Texas Children's in their operating room and then Children's National. Uh,
well, tell me a little bit more about it seems to me that you're saying you did not have much autonomy within the large hospital system.
That's
And
exactly right. Not at all. The degree so I will step back. When I was a fellow, I didn't realize how much I was sheltered by. Like, I knew that as a trainee, yes, my day was gonna be packed, and yes, I fully expected but then when I crossed over to the faculty side, I thought that I would have some voice as to what my day would look like. And I was given very little latitude or options as far as what it looks like. So, my first year of faculty, some days I was in the operating room, some days I was in clinic. Within the same week, I could be occupying both spaces. Maybe one week I'll be completely in clinic. And it was quite chaotic in that regard.
tell me what, because you've been at some of the country's best pediatric hospitals. Texas Children's is a phenomenal place. St. Louis is phenomenal. Children's National, I live very close to it, and I send patients there. What do they get right that you've seen across all those three huge institutions?
I would say that the fact that you have one site where there are so many specialists. If I have a patient, and oftentimes I did, had a patient who managed to see me first and they were still on a wait list for a pulmonologist or a sleep study or what have you, I can pick up the phone and advocate for my patient and say, hey, can we move them up on the list? Many a times my colleagues were very accommodating. And so that was across the board. It was so convenient to be able to help advocate for my families and form those relationships. Those relationships not only extend clinically, but also research as well for interesting questions to be able to collaborate. And I found that the attitude of those in other disciplines was, frankly, very much more congenial than the relationships within your own department or division. Oddly enough, but this is a sentiment that was shared with me by many of my colleagues that often it's to go across the aisle and do projects together was actually easier. So I think that is where the hospitals get it right, having everybody on site, that level of accessibility.
What could they do better?
Oh, wow. The answer is 1, 2, and 3, the bureaucracy, 100%. I had no idea the degree in which it impacts just your work culture, day to day, the reason decisions are made, it's all because of people trying to really pander to the leaders, the higher ups, who frankly are looking at the bottom line. They're so disconnected to patient care and what is really needed in the hospital system.
Yeah, we talk a lot to people who are very successful. And one theme that comes across successful medical enterprises is the diet. They're really good, whether it's a hospital, private practice, a big super group that encounters success is they have a strong administrator, an MBA, paired with a strong physician leader. And when you have that dyad, then it balances the need of the patient and the clinical workforce with the needs of keeping the revenue coming in so that you can afford the best in class of the clinicians. Unfortunately, most hospitals are run by an MBA, and the clinicians are just there to cheer them on and make sure they get $7 or $8 million salary a year, while the general pediatrician is making 160,000 a year. Not the most equitable or reinforcing or pleasing setup. So
Now, a lot of physicians are, after they've worked a good number of years and have experience, now they're going on to get a healthcare MBA. They know what they feel the patient care on their own skin. They know the numbers and what will make things work. Hopefully, more physicians get their MBAs.
Yeah.
yes, I think within the industry, the hospital administrators, the private equity people, they don't want the clinicians involved.
Of course, they don't. They
They
think
want to kick him out of the room so that they can churn out the dollars as fast as they can, get their bonuses, and leave before you know what hits the fan. Um,
what they do is they convince the physicians, hey doc, go into the room, do what you do best, the medicine, the doctoring part. Let us take care of all the rest.
Exactly. And turn a blind eye. One thing that really came up a lot for me with the organizations I was at was that there was such a huge pressure to see more patients, but there was no bandwidth to handle more patients. The wait list was just so ridiculously long, right? And so it's like we can't even handle who we already have on our docket. But yet the pressure is to see more patients. And then what we discovered within the anesthesia department is that the billing department wasn't skilled in billing anesthesia services. So I think the pressure should have been to extract the most out of those we've already served instead of forcing us to see more patients to overcompensate for the billing issues that were there. So there was a lot that just did not it was so inefficient. And again, the reason we go into this is because we want to serve to the highest level. And we don't want it to feel like a factory where there's a churn and a churn. But that's exactly what it was feeling like. Since the pandemic, the shortages, my gosh, I think all of us are trained that if a patient needs something, even if it's outside of what we would do as a doctor, we would do it. If we walk in a patient's room and they say, "Can you please get me a cup of ice?" I'm not gonna say I'm not here for that. I will say, "Yes, sweetheart, I'll get you a cup of ice. May I ask you these questions first?" Right? And the environment that was being created because so many of these per diems or short-term hires, temporary folks would come in, is that they were like, "I'm not here for that. I'm here to do A, B, C, and D, and outside of that, somebody else is gonna have to do it." So I found that because I was the full-time employee and because obviously I want to serve patients to the highest level, I was doing a lot more than what I would be doing just within the clinical capacity. And I saw that these temporary folks, they had way more autonomy than I did. They knew when they were going home. They got paid a very nice rate for their services that they made sure was A, B, C, and D, and that's it. And the rest of us were just picking up that slack in addition to all of what we had to do. And again, nobody's getting bonuses for any of this stuff. I quickly did the math myself and said, wow, wait a minute. Our patients are coming to us post pandemic even in a greater mental health crisis than before, in more pain than ever before, requiring more services. It was compassion fatigue, huge emotional labor on top of just more to get through the day. I was like, no, this is not sustainable. I had to know.
so I often say that revenue cycle management, is the blood that goes through the veins of any medical organization. If you get RCM wrong, the heart stops and the mission stops. And that's one of the biggest mistakes we hear over and over again of medical practices. They don't pay attention to the RCM and they think they can make it up on volume, and it's impossible. If you're not getting paid appropriately for the work that you're doing, more work will just lose you more money. It's amazing how few administrators understand that simple concept. They don't understand it.
what they do with the billing and the RCM at a hospital level, there's so much billing happening every single minute of the day, from open heart surgery to ear tubes to ear infections. The billing people are a finite number of them. They would rather go after the big open heart surgery case and deal with whatever it takes to get that claim paid, than to deal with 100 ear infections because there's more money on the open heart
True.
surgery, right?
True. And they also rather cut the billing department to save money on salaries and ask the physicians to code in the EMR, so that it's just one more thing the physician's doing, which takes you away from clinical care. And in DC, the things are really tough. The GW faculty plan for the last 2 years, they're making about $400 million. And out of those $400 million that they make, that's not the profit. That's what they bring in revenue. They lose 80 million. So they're short 80 million for the past 2 years. And what do? They do exactly as Alicia said. They ask the adult endocrinologist to book their patients every 10 minutes. And it's like, how can you be an endocrinologist? You can't see a patient in 10 minutes. I cannot look at your hemoglobin A1C and your lipid profile and your weight and see what medicines you're on and in 10 minutes and have a conversation with you and move on to the next patient. It's impossible
The EHRs are very bloated at a hospital system level.
and inefficient.
They're very complicated. I guess medicine is complicated, so the EHR has to be complicated. But the funny story, we have the EHR in our hospital and I have all my templates all set up. Something happened. They made an upgrade and all my templates disappeared. So I said, I'll just reuse the discharge summary from the adult medicine. I had this monster screen pop up with 500 things that I had to click. So I said, oh boy, these poor adult doctors, it's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And no. And a few things with that. One is there's been tons of studies about one of the largest physician dissatisfiers, and there's the EHR. There was one study in particular looking at the gender differences. Women are spending more time in the electronic medical record, which increases their dissatisfaction. They found that patients tend to send women longer portal messages than they do their male physicians. And it leads to this ridiculously long back and forth, which that was another thing that just was so difficult is patient like, look, I know you do pain, but I have these other questions about these other medical issues. I did receive pressure to decrease our patient appointment because new patient evaluations were 90 minutes. And we cannot compromise on that. When patients come in, about 15 minutes of it is just them crying because I am their fifth, sixth, seventh person that they've seen about this problem. And no one else has been able to address it. And how we're their last stop and last hope and all of the drama they've been through with their prior medical appointments, not being believed. Pain is just, it affects every aspect of life and it's very personal. So, yeah, we had to push back hard on that.
So you
Absolutely.
you mentioned at the pool, which just caught my interest. And one of the centers that you were working, therapies anesthesiologists all moved on at the same time.
Yes. Yes. So that speaks a lot to the work culture within the perioperative space, within the OR. A lot of the staff, circulating nurses, PACU nurses, they were all leaving. There was a high churn there. And with COVID and there being shortages that they couldn't even hire temporary workers for. Folks were recovering patients within the operating room themselves and
Wow.
returning the patients to the room themselves. So as you can imagine, that is adding an extra layer of work and load to an already busy day, right? Like you can't check the labs on the ICU patient coming down if you're pushing a bed upstairs. If you're seeing that the temporary worker is being more respected and paid more than you are, you begin to wake up and say, okay, this isn't. I have allegiance to the organization, and yet that's not being respected.
What did the managers say? Because if I was going to
Oh,
lose
yeah.
13 pediatric anesthesiologists at one, it's not like I can pop a bag in the microwave and tomorrow there's a new pediatric anesthesiologist. It takes 11 years of training just to be anesthesia, right?
Mhm.
And then another 2 to 3 years of fellowship.
So thankfully, when it comes to fellowships, all the anesthesia fellowships are 1 year. But to your point, still, you're not going to find a pediatric anesthesiologist just floating in the breeze that can work readily. What ended up occurring was they threw money at the problem and a sizable six-figure raise commensurate with market value was then offered to those who decided to stay.
And so I understand now a little bit why you moved from the academic world to consulting for the corporate world. Tell me more about what you're doing in the corporate world.
Yes. Okay. Within the clinic, I was doing a lot of work with parents regarding work accommodations and helping them enabling them to be able to take their child to all their different appointments without them losing their job. Some families, unfortunately, by the time they came to us, one of them already had to leave the workplace and they became full-time caregiver to their child. So I said, can I be on the proactive end? Do I have to be on the end where I'm like picking up pieces time and time again? So out of that experience, what I offer to corporations is really working with their HR department on how the workplace can be a more pain aware place, a place where we can also work on preventing pain from happening before it even starts. We know that if a child has pain, the whole family is affected. So, working with corporations regarding flexibility so that families can take care of their child without losing their job. But also, too, I serve adults as well. So, designing a workspace where adults don't have such high frequency of musculoskeletal complaints, uh, using their wrists a lot or their neck pain or back pain. So, really being on the proactive side on how can we prevent pain before it even starts? And in the event that someone's family member is has pain or they themselves develop it, how can we create a work culture where they can still contribute to the workplace while taking care of themselves and undergoing treatment for their pain? Because there's a lot of these corporations, they offer little programs here and there that people don't even know about. And if they know about it, they don't want to tap into it because they don't want to highlight that there's anything wrong. Sharing with others that they have pain, it's associated with a lot of stigma. And nobody wants to be thought of as being unable to carry their weight, if you will. We need a better way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in the corporate world, people dye their hair, they put veneers on their teeth, they do plastic surgery on their face because they don't wanna look old. Because if you look old, they fire you,
Yeah.
right? It's such a competitive environment that it's always on. Tell me why you're passionate about pain management. Not just putting people to sleep in the OR, that's fun, but why pain management?
Because it goes back to me wanting to care for those that are most vulnerable. And I was like, who is most vulnerable than a child in pain? The fact that pain does affect every aspect of life allows me to connect with patients and families outside of the hospital, see them as people again, hobbies, interests. And we craft pain treatment plans really according to what their goals are. So it's individualized. And I so thoroughly enjoy that. Seeing the teenagers who come to clinic with their huge sketch pad and they're showing me all the sketches that they do or their knitting work that they've made or just the soccer ball. I love being able to connect with them on a personal way like that and families sharing and opening up their lives to me. And I get that through pain.
What
So
kind
you're
of
really a
medical cases
pediatrician.
do you deal with?
Pardon?
What kind of medical cases do you deal with?
I would say that the it's really tough getting patients who have been diagnosed with postural orthostatic tachycardic syndrome, who have really bad, like gastroparesis. They have feeding tubes or lines in place for hydration. They've been medicalized so much. Received, I'm in the process of getting my second G tube because this other thing fell out. And now I got this thing in to help nourish me, or to see kids that have been just passed to from one specialist to the other, and along the way, they've collected some kind of line or tube because it's really difficult to remind those kids of what life was like beforehand. The focus isn't so much improving quality of life for them as it is, I have these appointments lined up and I have these medications and I have these things to do. They're just so inundated. They're, like I said, highly medicalized in that way. And that saddens me because I've had other patients who patients who we've treated radiation pain and they've undergone cancer treatments who really have gotten able to get back to life again. And so I think that population, the hypermobility slash POTS slash chronic abdominal pain, gastroparesis, that's been a really challenging population to serve.
But even someone, your wife, George, right
Mm.
after her ankle injury,
Mhm.
she's not fully back to
No.
her 100%, and she's
Yeah.
still experiencing some pain.
Yeah.
And a really good pain specialist could craft a plan so your wife could get to playing tennis 3 times a week like she used to before the injury.
Yeah.
And that's a huge thing. We're not talking about somebody that's chronically addicted to Oxycontin.
Right.
We're talking about someone that was, Elia's a physician. She's a wonderful pediatrician and she's an awesome mother. And on top of that, she's a great tennis player and she's not been able to play tennis now for almost a year after the ankle injury. And that would be such a huge game changer to get her back on the tennis court. And that's what a real good pain specialist will do for you. And we often don't think about that. The ankle's healed. Well, it's a problem. There's no fracture left. It healed. So I want to explore a little bit with you about how do we think about the biosocial psychological approach to treating pain?
Yes, the bio-psychosocial approach is the way we both assess and treat pain. And the bio, the body, psych, the mind, and the social part is the way we engage with family, friends, and the rest of society at large. Now, what I love about this approach is that it addresses all the areas of life that pain affects. Within medicine, many physicians focus on the body aspect. And so that's why I have patients come to me like, oh, I've tried every medicine. None of the medicines work. That's only one part of a very holistic spectrum because often the depression, the anxiety, from not being able to do the things that they liked to do before, that wasn't addressed. And we know that if it's not, that's going to potentiate pain as well. Not being able to engage in the hobbies that they previously enjoyed, that causes a lot of grief. And so it's like, how can we get them plugged back in? Because as you mentioned, even though there's no tissue damage apparent, we know that with chronic pain, it's a signaling problem. There is a connection issue there, and something is maintaining that misfiring. And it's like, where is that occurring? So, to being able to support mentally, psychosocially is very key as well.
So you had a wonderful TED Talk and you cracked me up because I have the worst analogies in the whole. But you say that being in pain is like being in love.
Yeah.
We want to share what that's all about.
Yes. Yeah. What was meant by that was that when you're in love, right, no one can convince you otherwise. Love just permeates everything that you do. The person that you having a crush on, you're thinking about them. If they wanted something, you would absolutely do it. It encompasses you body and mind. And when you share with others, look, I'm in love with this person, people tend to respond like, "Oh, that's so great." Like they are automatically with you in that experience. They're not questioning it,
George and I, because we would say, "Are you sure?"
parsing out what that love sensation is, right? Do you feel it in your body or do you feel it in your mind? Is we don't do that. We understand that it's a body and mind phenomena. The butterflies in the stomach and the heart racing when the person comes around. We can understand that. However, folks who have pain chronically, it also affects every aspect of life. It can color the way we experience life. And when people share they're in pain, they often get, do you feel that in your head or in your body? And that's what are you talking about? It's both. Yeah. It's both. And we can understand that when it comes to falling in love, but yet when it comes to pain, that there's a disconnect there.
And you're talking in Miami, you talked about the importance of exercise when you're in pain. And I found out this the hard way after I fractured, dislocated my shoulder. a couple of years ago on the bicycle. When I did the stationary bicycle, my shoulder pain would be less, even though I wasn't exercising the shoulder because I couldn't. Just getting the blood flow and improve the pain.
Yeah.
He also said something fascinating. I'm going to go back to Delia because that's a nice case review. So I don't think Delia fractured her ankle. It was just a really bad sprain. And the x-rays and the MRI are now all normal, but she still has some discomfort when she walks. And one of the pearls that you gave at the talk, which I had no idea, is we don't know what you do. I don't know what to write for when I send a Delia to physical therapy. A person like Delia who doesn't have tissue damage at this point, what she needs is a specific type of physical therapy to desensitize her. You call it something else. She has adenamia, so there's a specific thing I have to write on that script. What is that you call it?
So if her ankle at this point, she can't even touch it, if she has something called allodynia, meaning that she has pain for non painful stimuli, then part of physical therapy would include desensitization, which means that the physical therapist would be walking her through a program where her ankle is exposed to initially like a feather touch. And then as she's able to tolerate that, introduce progressively more coarse material to that ankle until she really doesn't have any sensitivity to that skin anymore. So yeah, it definitely provides some guidance if they do have allodynia to put a desensitization program. Or if she is walking with a brace or needing some kind of assisted device of any kind, instead of having land-based therapy when we already know walking on the ground is challenging. Introducing first the aqua therapy and then progressing to land would most likely be a better setup, easier to tolerate, and she can get her strength up. We find that a lot of patients, even though they don't tend to have an obvious limp, when we ask them to take their shoes and socks off and walk across the room, they do a lot of compensatory things that is not a normal healthy gait. And so because they're doing all these compensatory things, it's throwing off their biomechanics, making them more prone to having falls.
Yeah, I was fascinated by that part of your talk because I do see kids with back pain, and I think like an adult physician, they need cord strengthening.
Yes.
Their hamstrings are tight. They can't touch their toes. And it just fascinated me when you said, "Not that's not what they need." The orthopedics clear them. I've been doing this since 1992, and I've been getting it wrong for 30 years. So I finally found the answer. And can I send my functional abdominal pains for PT to be desensitized?
Okay, so when it comes to the functional abdominal pain, one thing that many of these patients have been through already is like a constipation workup. Like almost all of them have been on Miralax countless number of times, have had different imaging. Many parents recognize that, hey, it's not about the constipation because even when they're not, they still have this abdominal pain. The point of the physical therapy is twofold. One is that exercise, we know, positively restores the nervous system. When it comes to chronic pain of any kind, being able to engage in some kind of low impact aerobic conditioning is going to help their overall well being. Mentally, so many of these kids are like laying up on the couch, curled in a ball, and they're not going to school and they're just focusing 100% on that pain. And what you focus on expands. So we don't want them focusing on that. And so getting them up and moving and reminding them that they have this ability to do this is really helpful. And pain flares that occur in the course of exercise, they tend to decrease less and less the more they do it. An element of abdominal pain that many people overlook is that it's not so much the viscera, but the abdominal wall can be a source of pain. And the way that we assess if the abdominal wall is a contributor is something called the Carnets time, having them do like a crunch maneuver. And if they are having worse pain, really bad pain, and they can point with one finger to the area of their abdomen that hurts, that suggests abdominal wall component. And there are techniques that physical therapists can do to help release that. And it's something that we look at before proceeding with doing an injection, for example, of the abdominal wall.
And when I send it to the physical therapist, would I ask them to do 10 weeks, once a week, for example?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And they would be able to do this crunch maneuver?
Yeah, it's very simple. So it's something that anyone can do. It doesn't have to be the physical therapist. It's very quick. Just literally having the patient bend their knees, do a sit up crunch, and asking them, does your pain worsen when I ask you to do this?
Okay,
Yeah.
great. I'm gonna use that in the clinic 'cause you know how many constipated kids with abdominal pain we see every day. And I do exactly as you say. I clean them out first and see if the pain doesn't go away. And then you talked about that psychology, and you brought up a bunch of really interesting things, which I find fascinating. CBT, which
Mhm.
is a very accepted intervention. But you also, and this made me crack up, as I say, prayer is CBT on your own. So I'm Catholic, and I've seen my mother walk up and down with a rosary praying every night. That's her meditation. It's a very repetitive way of calming yourself down before she went to bed. And you said how, whether it's CBT, meditation, prayer, very important components of chronic management pain.
Absolutely. When we talk about pain, uh, the old school way is people thinking that pain is just something that lives in the part of the body that hurts. But they don't realize is that pain actually lives in the brain. So we have to engage the brain if we want to treat it. That sensation is going through the spinal cord and to the brain, going through multiple different filters that can amplify or decrease pain. So if there is like a pre-existing depression or anxiety there, or this is a situation where they were scared or an environment where they were bullied. All of this can amplify that pain sensation, which is why if you introduce two people to the same stimulus, you're most likely going to get two different responses. Engaging the brain through those different cognitive techniques allows us to decrease that sensation that's coming in from the periphery instead of increasing it. Because so many families come to us that the patient's scared, family scared, and all that's doing is amplifying that abnormal signaling. They need to learn techniques so that we can actually decrease that.
So it reminds me of two things, and I want to hear your thoughts on it. One of the really fascinating healthcare leaders, Mark Bertolini, he used to be the CEO at that, and he had a skiing accident where he lost pretty much all function of his right arm. And he has, it's not a phantom pain, but chronic pain from that injury. And he took up mindful meditation. And when he speaks about this, he says, the pain's still there. It's there with me every day. The pain medicine doctors had me on every narcotic they could find so that I wouldn't feel pain. I said, I can't have a life like this,
Yep.
being doped up all day. I got to accept my pain and learn to not allow the pain that's always going to be there stop me from having my full life.
Absolutely.
And that was just such an amazing word of wisdom. And then he implemented that all throughout Aetna. Unfortunately, he sold out, and the story of Aetna will be told another time. But he was great. And then there's another person that fascinates me, John Kabat-Zinn, who was at Boston, and he created a program. It's called the Mindfulness Stress Reduction Program, and it is exactly what you're talking about. It is a balance of mindful meditation without it being too Buddhist and very gentle hatha yoga exercises in a 6-week group class program. And they have shown phenomenal results for people who cannot be helped because the program will not accept you. unless you've gone through the regular medical track and you're still experiencing pain. And it's all that you were talking about, the exercise, the meditation, and the social connection that make that program successful. And it's been around for 20 years. It just doesn't get enough oxygen in the pediatric community. Any
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Oh my gosh. I love how you highlighted one of the real crux of what we get at in pain treatment, which is we introduce many different modalities. Again, all holistic care, really to get to a place where patients accept it and they recognize that I'm still going to do what I want out of life anyway. And the irony of this, because with kids, we do have neuroplasticity on our side. When kids stop caring about it, they don't put energy or effort into it, and they're focused on what they love to do, pain just eventually fades into the background. And they can decide to tune into that pain, make it louder if they want to, but it's no longer that overbearing big bad wolf that it was before, dictating everything they did minute by minute. No longer. So I really appreciate that story you gave about the CEO and how it's all about taking control of your life. A
Do they reimburse for this stuff?
good question.
Oh,
For the
thank
That
God.
mindful reduction stress program,
I don't know.
I think some employers like Aetna was very forward leaning on this when Mark was there as their CEO.
Yeah.
I doubt that they are today, but they used to have mindful meditation classes for all of their employees for free because Mark was really big. That made for a healthier, more balanced workforce, and that made for greater success for their shareholders. But you have to be forward leaning and visionary and committed. And once you lose that leader, the organization is never the same. So I think they do in the UK, they adapted the same program for depression. I don't know if the right word is mandated, but once you're through the acute phase of depression in the UK, the health system will put you through a 6-week program for depression based on meditation, yoga, and community. And by doing this 6-week program, they've shown that they reduced the relapse rate by over 50%. And so it's now part of the standard of care of how they manage depression in the UK. We are nowhere near.
that's what's so frustrating about this is the insurance companies, it's just denying everything. Denial, denial. And I already expressed, and you are already aware of the staff shortages and just having to take care of the patient in front of you, to get called by insurance companies to have to do a peer to peer and only to discover that they're not your peer, right? It's just most of the time for me, it's an orthopedic surgeon who doesn't treat chronic pain, but because it said back pain, now they're calling and they have no idea what's going on. A couple of colleagues of mine, they wrote an article in Stat News about how chronic pain treatment shouldn't just be for the rich. It shouldn't just be for the wealthy. Everyone who needs this should be able to tap into it. But there's definitely, because again, the insurance companies, it's difficult. And then with the wait lists as well, it definitely makes treatment a challenge.
You should come work for my friend Randy Payton in Sterling, Virginia.
I am licensed in Virginia.
I want to introduce you to him. God, is he a genius? He's got such a phenomenal independent orthopedic practice. And he's one of the, I think by volume, Randy does the most knee and hip replacements of any other surgeon in Reston. And just a phenomenal human being. But I just thought about that. The two of you could really help the community. I want to touch on something that fascinates me. And you said it a little bit at the lecture about social connection, but you also said how important it is to find something that you're passionate about. And for George, is his guitars. Okay. He's really passionate about his guitars. For me, is good bourbon. There's a whole science behind flow. And the moment that you enter that state of flow, which the psychologists, have shown now, if your runner is past the first mile, but you hear the great basketball players, Scottie Pippen, or what was it? Who was the other Chicago Bulls guys? Great.
Oh,
Michael
Michael Jordan.
Jordan. Michael Jordan.
You hear them talk about when they're in the court and they are no longer aware that they exist as human beings. They do everything they do just flows without effort. They're one with the court and the team, and they're not aware of the crowd. They're not aware of anything. Everything is like an automatic pilot, and they are so happy. And people need to seek that state of flow in some hobby or activity that they do for overall well-being, but also as you alluded to before, good strategies to manage your chronic pain.
Absolutely. When we look at quality of life, that's tied to function and doing the things that you want like to do. When we talk about physicians and we know how awful burnout is and physician shortage, it's largely driven by the fact that people, it's almost like they forgot what they enjoy. They lost touch with themselves. And when you do that, you are prone to burning out because it's like you don't know who you are anymore and you're not getting that fulfillment. However, engaging in these hobbies or just following your curiosity, right? Because some people are like, I don't know what are you curious about? Start there. Being curious about it, opening up that fascination again, that is what's going to protect you from chronic pain, from a lot of mental health conditions, and give you that fulfillment back. Not everything has to be monetized, but absolutely finding that thing to get connected to yourself again.
Yeah. George, thoughts?
People work hard. They should also play hard, right? Too much work is no good. Too much playing is no good either. So you have to find the balance. I've been playing guitars in bands for a million years. I find the time. I always find the time. I should be busy, but I find the time because just too much work. I remember I had a senior partner who used to, he retired at about 76, 77. He had no hobbies. All he knew was medicine. He would say to me, one day you're going to come to work and you're going to find me slouched dead over this chair. He was a grumpy guy. He wasn't, people loved him, but I don't think he had any hobbies at all other than seeing patients. And most doctors do that.
Yeah,
A
that's
lot
up.
of doctors do that.
Yeah, and what ends up happening is that they think that being a doctor is all they are. It encompasses their entire identity, which is why so many people stay in workplaces that don't serve them because they're like, what else do I have? Where else am I going to go to? You could do exactly what you want anywhere else. You're skilled, you're brilliant, you can do this.
Being a doctor sure beats manual labor.
I don't know. Some manual labor can be fun.
No.
It's immediate gratification when you
Yeah.
put a nail through a piece of wood and you plaster what it's supposed to be. It's done. It's that there's no waiting for 6 months to see the results.
There is a pediatrician, actually, Dr. Una. I don't know if you all are familiar with her, but yeah, listening to her podcast actually helped me a lot with overcoming a lot of the brainwashing that we undergo as physicians about what our abilities and capabilities are. So I really appreciate her. Yeah.
So tell me more about your podcast.
So my podcast is called Civo Sisters. And it was born out of I worked with Howard medical students. I went to conferences, spoke to medical students across the country. Many of the medical students that run up to me were underrepresented in medicine. And they were like, you're an anesthesiologist? You mean there are Black women anesthesiologists out there? Really? I didn't know. And they had so many questions about what the unique experiences that we have on the other side of the blue drape. And so I kept being asked the same questions. And I'm like, look, if you have these questions and I keep getting asked the same questions, we need to have a podcast to just address all of this. And then I can share it, the different episodes, and everybody can have the answers at their fingertips. So I think that was like the big, it is a podcast to demystify and diversify the field of anesthesiology, all within the duration of an anesthesia break. An anesthesia break's about 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Oh,
What
The
we're told about the anesthesiologist is people usually don't know them. I remember having some
right.
surgeon came in. How you doing? How you feeling? What are you going to get? Do you have allergies? Don't worry, you'll have no pain. Next thing you know, count back from 100. That's all you remember, and then you wake up.
Yeah, and I've had some patients think that we just turn on a machine and walk out the room.
and wait, one more question.
So this was a fair one of the air fairs that I just could not pass up. We were looking at Cartagena, heard so many great things about it. Also, there's like an expat community. So if people are living outside of the US, we love hearing their stories. And that's what drove that fair purchase. We were able to go during my kids' spring break.
So
And
where'd you go at the hand?
yep, we went to Cartagena.
A week?
Yep, a week there.
And how was it?
Oh my gosh. We went to the Rosario Islands.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
George doesn't know what the Rosario Islands. There's these islands in the Caribbean, and Colombia's not a rich country, so you're not gonna get a nice boat to take you there. You take one made out of wood that you hope doesn't sink when you're going there, and that's part of the experience. The islands are beautiful, right? Is that about did I describe it about right?
Yes, thankfully, we were able to get, like, a speedboat, which was, again, its own unique experience, but, yeah, it was beautiful.
And the food, did you enjoy the food?
Love the food. Oh my gosh, we had fish, like, the entire time, it was absolutely delicious. A lot of the food reminded me of what we had in Miami as well.
Anything else you wanna share with the audience before we sign off?
Oh, that if you're one of these physicians who you're like, "Look, I don't know much about pain," don't feel bad, don't beat up on yourself because really, we all haven't had much pain education within our medical school curricula, and we know that residencies don't really teach about it. I'm working with the American Academy of Pediatrics on getting more pain education within the offerings that AAP has. And stay tuned with that. And I would also encourage all physicians to, if you're in a work environment that isn't good for you, don't feel the need to stay. Don't do it. The work environment I was in, it felt like an abusive relationship in that I'm only in it for the kids. And the workplace should not be that way. It's just a word out there that whatever it is you decide, please operate within what's best for you and not out of fear. Because I feel like there's a lot of that piping through and it leads to burnout and it leads to health crises, all of which we don't need. Want.
Hey, George, you have any questions?
Oh, I think having a perfect, we are physicians. We are not business people. We're not clerks. We're not secretaries. We're physicians. We do have a profession. The patient is ultimately the end goal. We have to strike a balance between seeing patient care. I'll give you an example. I have a lot of physicians that I want this off. I want this weekend off. I want nights. I got to take care of my kids. I want to go to Little League. I assure you that I managed to attend 85 to 90% of all the school events. Everything that I had two boys. They wanted to do soccer. Okay. Soccer practice was always on Wednesday, and I always worked Wednesday nights. So that was no good. And the games were always on Sunday, and every couple of weeks I was on call. So they missed 1 year until I figured out that the best way to do it is you become an assistant coach. You convince the coach to do your practice on the day that you're off. And then eventually you become that coach, and practice happens when you say. So my practices were always on Tuesday. I had assistant coaches and said to them, I will be there late. If I will be there at all, you guys run the show. And my kids went through soccer and I coached two teams.
Wow.
But I adapted, I pivoted. I made my life work a little bit better. And I didn't just say to my workplace, I can't do this because I go to soccer practice. But it requires some physician engagement. You can't just say, I can't work on Sundays. Because the patients are there, they need us.
Mhm.
The
Right?
fascinating thing is that George's kids are phenomenal human beings. They're just awesome kids.
And they all play guitars and bass and drums, and they had rock and roll bands. I was a roadie. I was their manager. I did it all.
Yeah, Peter was just here this weekend, and we had so much fun. They're just great kids.
They're adapting. They learn to adapt their life. So what would you say, Dr. Peterson, if somebody told you, I'm going to Florida to study for the USMLE?
I'm assuming they're
You know what? He's going down with his girlfriend. They took the train down from Washington. So they stopped up at Herb's house. And with his girlfriend, they take the Amtrak. They go down there. They study. They've already been studying for the USMLE. They
mhm,
go there. They studied in your house, Herb, right?
Yeah, they're very disciplined. I
Couple
was
hours. They get on the train. They study on the train while the train is going down to Florida. They get to Orlando. They go to the Panera where they have Wi-Fi. They'll stay there until about 6 o'clock studying. Then they'll drive to Pompano Beach, where I have a condo right on the water. They got up, they studied, very disciplined and organized. They know when it's sunny, they'll go down to the beach a little bit, hang out. They'll go back and they'll study. You do that for 2 months, you'll get it.
yeah,
incredible.
yeah, Peter and Emily are incredible. They're really incredible. They're so smart, so disciplined, so kind.
But
They adapt. There's
yeah, they,
wonderful.
they did this before USMLE won, and they did very well.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. I hope to see you at a conference soon and definitely next year in Miami Children's Conference.
Yes, I'm
Yeah.
very excited.
All right.
All right.